you, Jan. Good evening, everyone. Extremely happy to host you here. Both participants joining now an online mode, and you present here at our EY office in Warsaw. Today we are going to talk about assurance over external ICT service providers from the perspective of new regulations, namely Digital Operational Resilience Act, DORA. My name is Wojciech Dańczyszyn. I'm representing EY Technology Risk team, and together with Magdalena Juszkiewicz, also from Technology Risk team, we will talk about the topic, and we are going to share with you our experience and some insights in that matter. But before we will start, I would like to make this meeting as much interactive as we can, as it is possible. So if you will have any questions from you sitting in the on-site, please let me know. I will repeat the question, so jump in. Do not hesitate to at any moment of time to ask questions. Good. Let's go briefly then through the agenda. So we will start with the importance of TPRM. So the topic we already discussed, the topic where the insights were shared by Jan, by Sebastian. Then we will go through the overview of requirements resulting from DORA, and especially the new one, which is ICT third-party risk management, where DORA imposes a lot of new things on the financial institutions. Then Magda will share with you perspective over risk management process, how to manage external ICT service providers in terms of their auditing, and how to gain assurance over their services they are providing to us. As mentioned, please jump in with questions, but also we have at the very end of our meeting a brief time for questions from you. Good. So I guess now what I'm going to say is a bit of a cliche in the terms of what we already heard. So how much does the TPRM is important in the modern world? So currently, as you all know, we are living in such a digitalized world that every company is extremely interconnected to each other, extremely interconnected to vendors, to technology, and obviously based on human factor. So this creates a lot of new risks, especially when we'll think that currently the processes that are performed by the company, now they look like more like a production line. So we are assembling our product based on different parts, on different elements like IT, technology, obviously external ICT providers, and of course parts that we are assembling from our own companies. So in this modern world, the risk of disruption of processes is extremely high if we will take a look at the perspective of the supply chain attacks. And let me remind you what happened on July 19. Everybody remember that day? Actually, personally, I was flying Wizz Air airplane very day before that date. So I was quite lucky. Why? Because as you remember, the CrowdStrike incident happened, and what was the consequences? We faced the massive IT disruption where millions of Windows users were affected. In fact, 8.5 million of Windows devices were directly affected by that incident. What was the outcome? Thousands of flights grounded, disruption on the airports, hospitals and care services also disrupted, especially a pointing system which caused as a result a lot of queues and a lot of people that cannot join and cannot appoint their visit at the doctors. What is even more important, the emergency 911 service in Alaska in US was disrupted. It also has been affected by that failure. So a lot of examples that show us how we are dependent on external service provided, how does the reliance on the software from external companies may disrupt our processes, our services we as a company are providing to our customers and clients. However, the supply chain risk we are discussing right now is widely recognized. I will refer to what already Sebastian showed to us, and let's take a look on top emerging cybersecurity threats that are prepared by ENISA report. ENISA, which is EU agency for cybersecurity, and one of the top risks is obviously supply chain attacks. Supply chain attacks where there's a risk of using, for example, open source libraries, and through that way malicious threat attackers may gain. It could be used as a vector attack toward our companies. So also referring what we heard previously, SBOM, so software bill of material is extremely important when we are thinking about the third-party risk management and how we would like to secure our software perspective, but also wider supply chain considered as a not only software but other service providers that render services for our companies. This is not only the perspective of ENISA, but also what we can observe recently. EU also recognized that risk, and as a part of a wider 5-year strategy of building a robust financial sector in EU, we have been provided with DORA, so Digital Operational Resilience Act, a new act that was imposed by European Commission and EU Council that focus on securing companies' operational risk and how we are continuing as a financial institution providing our services. So in a nutshell, what DORA is about. As mentioned, this is an act that has been imposed on financial institutions across EU. What is important, this is the answer of EU to rising cybersecurity threats that may disrupt financial institutions across countries, being state member countries of European Union. Another reason why DORA has been implemented is a harmonization of requirements across EU. So far we were facing a situation like this, that it was the responsibility of local authorities, local financial authorities, to define requirements for financial institution in particular country, to define cybersecurity perspective and as well as operational resilience perspective. And for example, we were facing situation like this, that in some countries the level of importance of those regulations was quite high. They were quite well developed and mature. The good example is Poland, obviously, where we so far had a recommendation D that were more or less covering 70% of DORA requirements. But on the other hand, we had other countries like Baltics, where the supervision was not so harsh enough. And for example, if you take a look on Revolut, who actually received a banking license in Lithuania and then can operate in EU. So now the perspective has changed, and EU is aiming to harmonize those requirements across all EU countries by imposing DORA Act. What is important that the DORA is very widely applied to different types of financial institution. We have about 21 different types, starting with banking sector, going through the insurance sector, even financial institution that can be classified as a crowdsourcing are also affected by DORA and should implement requirements that are stipulated in that act. Good. So let's take a quick look on the path to DORA, so the schedule. DORA has been published nearly 2 years ago, in 2023, in January. Now we are closing to the deadline, namely the date of January 17, 2025, when DORA will be operationalized and all requirements will be needed to, and the companies will need to comply with DORA requirements. Apart from the fact that we are approaching to that date, I think it's also worth mentioning also what Sebastian before was highlighting. Actually, DORA is not only the act, but it's also accompanied by a number of technical standards and implementation technical standards, so-called RTSs and ITSs. So those are documents that precise what DORA is about, providing some examples what we need to stipulate in a particular policies, how we, for example, should implement some solutions. So this is another dimension, and the granularity of DORA is very, very deep. So taking into account what we have now, for example, on Polish market, namely recommendation D imposed by Polish Financial Authority, now we are facing with new act. As mentioned, 70%, nearly 70% of requirements are more or less the same, what we already know, but I always telling that the devil sits within the details. Why? Because DORA provides really a lot of different flavors and different additional requirements to what we know so far. Good. So let's take a quick look on the main 5 DORA pillars. So those are IT risk management framework, ICT-related incident management, digital operational resilience testing, managing of the third party. So here we have a very, very important chapter that focuses on the risk we are today talking about. And the last but not least, sharing information on cyber threats. So if we will take a look on the first pillar, ICT risk management framework, here we are talking about setting up the structure, setting up the what we know from the ISO 27K kind of management system over operational resilience, where we need to define governance, processes, reporting lines, and also apply respective technology that will help us to ensure resilience of services we are providing. That part also includes quite a few new things. One of the most important part resulting from that section is the fact that we as a company, we need to identify and point out so-called CIFs, namely critical and important functions within the organization. This is something new. DORA provides a set of criteria we need to be comply with. Of course, some may say that this is not a new thing, because so far we had a business impact analysis where as an output we received a list of critical processes within the company. But here we have a bit different, I would say, approach, a bit wider, because DORA specifies some additional criteria we need to take into consideration while identifying critical and important functions. And also, what is important, we need to identify ICT, so information and communication technology systems, supporting not only critical and important functions, but all functions within our company. So this is quite challenging thing to implement. Because this is based on this classification, we have around 17 another requirements that are linked with those list of critical and important functions. To give you an example, information systems that supports those CIFs. For example, we need to conduct periodic user review on the biannually, so twice a year. Another thing, we need to, for example, review firewalls configuration for those systems that sits within a network that and supports critical and important functions. So there are a lot of requirements that relates and base directly on how we will conduct this identification. Then second pillar, we have ICT-related incident management. So again, nothing new, because every company obviously in financial sector manage their incidents, but here DORA provides a new classification of incidents. We have a definition of major incidents. We have a new obligation related to reporting, new obligation to calculating losses that results, financial losses that results from major incidents throughout the year. So again, some of new things that we will need to apply. Then, once we have incident management process set up, once we have defined business continuity plans and the ways how we are responding to disruption in our organization, how we are providing recovery of IT systems after the failure. So the question is, we are good to this point as we will test this. So DORA provides a very wide range of different types of tests to make sure that we as a company were ready to respond if failure of incident or another disruption to our ICT servers occurs. So this is the whole bunch of different approach to conduct testing, including TLP tests, so advanced red team tests that should also be conducted for those by those financial institutions that will be pointed out by the local financial authorities. And finally, we are reaching the topic of today's meeting. So managing of ICT third-party risk. As mentioned, DORA devotes the specific chapter to that topic. We'll cover this in a moment on another slide, so that we can now move on to the last pillar, namely information sharing on cybersecurity threats. So here also it's not DORA provides not only obligation but also possibilities. So here we have a possibility to share information about the cyber threats across industries, so that, for example, we can once we will identify some threat that may be applicable to another participant on the financial sector market, this is the place where we can when we can do this. For example, if we will take into consideration banking sector, this is something that is that happens already. A lot of banks exchange information about the cyber threats between each other or with the assistance of dedicated CESIRTs or another bodies that operates on the market, so that's nothing new. This will be to some extent a new thing for companies that operates on the less mature markets. Good. So let's move on to ICT third-party risk requirements that DORA imposes. So here we can divide those requirements into three main areas. The first is contractual agreements. Very important thing while we are entering into the relation with external third party. DORA provides two sets of requirements. The first set applies to all ICT vendors, ICT suppliers. And the second one is linked directly to the one thing I mentioned before, so identification of critical and important functions, because those external providers that supports critical and important functions must adhere and comply with additional set of requirements that we need to include into the contract. So very important aspect. Why? Because obviously it will take time. If you will imagine how many external ICT vendors average company use, it's like a massive work, because we need to enter into discussion with our provider, annex our agreement. So this is a really massive work. Second thing we need to take a look on is building a register of information that relates to all contractual arrangements. And this is something what DORA specifies on the lower level, namely on the so-called ITS, so Implementation Technical Standard level. we have dedicated ITS, so dedicated regulation that defines the structure of the of such register. It covers, as far as I remember, it's about 100 different types of information we need to include into that register. So this is like immense number of information. Of course, some of them will not be applicable for the type of contract, but still we need to implement such register. By the way, as a side comment, even though the DORA has been already implemented, it's actually law that came into force. Some RTSs and some ITSs are not yet finalized. A good example is ITS on Register on Information, where we have the status of this regulation in so-called final draft. However, it has been a month ago rejected by the EU Commission. So now there's a discussion underway how to change some requirements that are mentioned in that regulation. So even though we have a DORA already, we are acting in some kind of uncertainty. So not all requirements are defined yet. Good. Then let's move on to the next requirements that are that DORA imposes while we are talking about the third-party risk management. So DORA defines the process of entering into relation with third party into a couple of steps, starting with pre-contractual phase, where we need to conduct so-called ex-ante risk assessment. So in a nutshell, answer the question whether we would like to outsource some part of our ICT services or not. Then, while we are entering into, while we decide to go into such relation, we need to conduct so-called due diligence, so assess the risk of entering into relation with that particular vendor, taking into consideration what Jan mentioned before, so the type of relation. I remember well with your presentation, we have poles that were fighter pilots and bombers. So here, the same thing with DORA. DORA provides 19 different types of services. We can divide our ICT or allocate our ICT providers in. So here we'll have the same, depending on the nature of the relation. We will need to provide different type of requirements that should be also reflected in our contract. So risk assessment is one part, and moving on, of course, throughout while we will select our vendor, while after we will enter into the relation, so we start to monitor our ICT vendor, ICT service provider. And here, DORA imposes one important thing. We need to audit and inspect our provider and also define the frequency of such audits and inspections. So here, the constant monitoring of all vendors is a must. And now we are not talking about those who support critical and important functions or not. We are talking about all ICT vendors. Sorry for the blackout. This is Eco Building, so we have a light back on. Thank you. Right, and this is one perspective of monitoring, and obviously the second part of monitoring is SLA, so how well our provider is fulfilling the SLA things. So this is something what for some companies will be new, because so far we had a situation where, for example, banking industry or underwriting companies, they were mainly focusing. We will take as an example Polish market. They were focusing on the IT outsourcing, according to EBA guidelines, for example, and things that were outsourced to the cloud. Now the range of IT services is much broader. We are talking about all companies that support our ICT services. But that's not the sole requirement. DORA provides also a definition of so-called critical third-party provider. The designation of such companies will take place on the EU level based on criteria listed here on the slide. So whether the company provides a systemic impact on the stability, continuity, and quality of service provided, resilience of ICT third-party service provider, importance for the financial entity, and degree of substitutability. So whether if we can switch to another provider and avoid vendor lock-in. So mainly those biggest players on the market that provides ICT services will be appointed by the EU as so-called CTPP, so critical third-party providers, which is directly linked with a list of obligations. So here we've got like 8 sections of different type of requirements that such CTPPs will need to fulfill. Of course, ensuring security, availability, continuity, and scalability of their services they are providing, to make sure that the company that are using those services those services will be provided. Physical security is another example. Of course, risk management, so the starting point of building the security over services and over the data that are processed. Applying standards, widely recognized standards that are in place is another part. Ensuring that our data is well secured and also portable, so that we can switch to another provider in a smooth way, and a lot of new requirements that those companies will need to fulfill. So from one point, this is a good direction, because we will have some list of critical vendors that we can rely to some extent. But on the another side, if we as a company will not identify into details what we are using, what types of services this is linked to, we still the responsibility still resides on the company level. And as said, a good example is a CrowdStrike incident, where the connection of Microsoft service of CrowdStrike servers resulted in a disruption of a lot of companies on the market. Now we would like to focus on the way how to audit, how to verify our external ICT providers. So I'll hand over to Magda, who will share with you the techniques and the ways how we can rely on and check the reliance on our providers. Magda, the floor is yours. Thank you.
I'm Magda Juszkiewicz. I am a manager in technology risk team in Warsaw office. So let's start with a quick catch-up of the risk management process for external ICT service providers. As Wojtek mentioned, the DORA, together with RTSs and ITSs, regulates the whole process of the risk management of the ICT service providers. So the process actually starts before entering into our contractual provision, so before signing the contracts, as we conduct the ex-ante risk assessment. And while conducting such assessment, we need to consider a few risks posed directly by the related RTS. So one of those risks is the operational risk. There's also legal risk. However, we're also touching the areas related strictly to procurement, like the reputational risk posed by the provider. We also need to consider factors such as data. And please keep in mind that DORA is talking not only about personal data, so we are a little bit, there's a wider scope than in terms of the GDPR, because the DORA is also telling us about the confidential data of the company. And we are not only talking about the way of processing, securing the data, we're also talking about the location where the data is processed. Moreover, we also need to consider the location of the ICT service provider, because we not only care of the location of data processing, but also of the location of the provider. We also need to consider the conflict of interest that is related to certain provider. We also need to check the concentration risk. But in terms of the concentration risk, there are like two aspects. The first one is related strictly to reliance on one sole supplier. We need to check how many contracts agreements are signed with the provider, how many services we are actually utilizing from a given provider. And the second aspect of the conflict of interest is related actually to technology, because we need to check whether we are relying like on a sole technology, because we can have one technology from various providers and still this will pose a risk for us. So after conducting the ex-ante risk assessment, we can go to the due diligence and to actually classify, to profile our provider, and to select areas, control, security measures that we need to add into our contract with the providers. The scope of the security measures and the controls will actually be a result of both the risk score from the due diligence and the type and actually characteristics of the service that will be provided by the vendor. After signing the contract and implementing the service, once it's fully capable and working in our organization, we actually are moving to the next step, to the monitoring of the provider. And here we should concentrate actually two aspects. The first aspect is strictly related to continuous monitoring of the service quality. It's related to SLAs, KPIs, and it's tailored strictly for each of the service. Because, you know, for some of the services, you will monitor the level of the service, the quality of the service on a daily basis, on a continuous basis. For example, in case of internet providers, but for some services, you will have like a monthly KPIs or SLAs for time when your tickets were solved, for how many changes were actually deployed in the production environment. However, the second aspect of the monitoring of the vendor is more, it can be more like a one process and can be like one approach for the organization. You need to establish process related on frequency and your approach, and of course it will be related to the risk. We will move on actually to the detailed aspects of the vendor monitoring on the next slides. As a result of our vendor monitoring, we can decide that the risk is on the same level as we assess the risk during the due diligence, or the risk is lower or higher. If our risk appetite says that we agree that we can cooperate with the vendor if the risk is same or lower in comparison to the risk that was assessed as a risk as a vendor profiling, we can continue our cooperation with the vendor. However, if the risk will be higher, we should do some actions. So the more drastic way is just to discontinue cooperation with the vendor. However, there's also the second option. We can ask our provider to implement an improvement plan to actually address our gaps and actually do the work, implement the security measures that were defined in the contract with our provider. If the vendor would not like to implement the improvement plan, we can still discontinue our cooperation with the provider. So now let's move on directly to the phase of the strict monitoring of the vendor provider to the actually periodic monitoring of the vendor. So the effective and efficient way to monitor the provider is to mix frequency and correct approach. So the frequency of the vendor monitoring, it's a result of the risk level that we assessed during the ex-ante and due diligence assessments. So for example, for our discussion today, let's assume that we've got high, medium, and low risk, the basic scale that it's used in many organizations. So this will be the result of the risk assessment, and the other factor that we need to determine while deciding what is our frequency, it's clarification whether the service that is provided by our ICT service provider is supporting critical or important function. Because if it is, no matter what will be the risk scale, we still may need to tune and change the frequency. So let's come back to our three scales. So for example, if we've got vendor with a high risk, we can conduct an audit or control once a year. For medium risk, it can be like 1 in 2 years. However, if our vendor is providing a service that is supporting critical or important function, we can still change the frequency. So we can decide, of course, in line with the risk appetite that is defined in our organization, that for those vendors, despite that the risk is medium, and for other vendors we would just select like audit once in 2 years, we can still ask vendors to conduct the risk assessment, the audit, actually once in a year. The other aspect that is a factor deciding whether our vendor monitoring is efficient and effective is the approach. In line with DORA, we've got a few options that we can utilize. The first one is actually the audit or the control that will be conducted directly by our organization. There are various approaches in terms of the responsibility of the audit. One of the approach says that you need a business unit responsible for third-party risk management that will be responsible for those audits. In other organizations, internal audit is conducting such assessment. Sometimes is a unit responsible for information security, sometimes cybersecurity. Sometimes it's even the owner of the vendor. Please keep in mind that whoever is responsible for conducting the audit, the consultations are always needed. Let's move on for the risk domains that should be covered, because we can have a procurement specialist who will coordinate everything with our provider. We can have great information security specialists. However, the efficient and effective monitoring of vendor should encompass few domains. The first one is related to information security and risk management. So in that case, we can, of course, add here controls and checks related to checking whether information security is in place. What about some basic processes like access management, password, authorization, or maybe our vendor has implemented the ISO 27001 and certified. In terms of risk management, we can check the risk management policy, we can check the control environment. We also need to concentrate on cybersecurity and IT operations. What about the patch management and vulnerability scanning? What about the penetration testing? What about the basic backups of data? We also should consider area related to business continuity. And here we can check business continuity management, testing of business continuity, business impact assessment, DRP, and similar areas. While assessing our vendors, we also should concentrate on data protection. And here, as I mentioned, we may sometimes need to consult the results of the audit, the results of the assessment with our DPO, because we need to concentrate on data encryption in transit or at rest. We can check whether our vendor is conducting data privacy impact assessment for key changes implemented in software that the vendor is providing for our organization. We also should include the cloud computing in our risk domains that we are covering for our vendors. And in terms of DORA, we need to concentrate also on the resource management, not only in terms of the assets, whether they are available, whether the vendor has enough capacity to provide have enough capacity on the disk, on the cloud to provide services for us. We also need to check the human resources. That is one of important areas indicated by DORA, because we need to check whether our vendor has sufficient capacity of people in their team that can provide service for us, and whether their skills are sufficient for our purposes. So no matter what approach you will choose, those are the domains. So let's come back to the approaches. So we discussed, even if we do the audit by ourselves, we still need to consult areas with various business units within the organization. So what if we as an organization don't have the capacity to conduct the audit? Well, we can still ask a third-party organization that can do it for us. So they can basically go to the vendor and ask same questions as we, and bring us the report, the results, even gather the evidence in our name. And after all, they should give us all the reports, sometimes work papers, and sometimes even the evidence, because that information, that assessment can be a valid reason for us to terminate the contract with our vendor if the risk is pretty high and the vendor is not implementing what was said in the contract. In terms of, so that was cases mostly used for like high and medium risk. for low risk, sometimes medium risk, we can execute the provider self-assessment. We can ask the provider to answer a questionnaire, and then we should verify it strictly to check if everything was clear. But we should not concentrate on a checklist like yes or no. We also should ask our provider for some comments, for some details. The other approach proposed by DORA is reliance on ICT third-party providers' internal audits. So please keep in mind, it's not our internal audits, our provider internal audits. However, in such case, the results can be a little bit biased. We know that the audit, whenever it's internal or external, should be independent. However, this report might be prepared by internal audit. However, still someone from the organization, from our vendor, will be considering as a report that will be provided to the customer. So they would like to look at the best as it could. And we've got the next option, so we can rely on attestation reports. So let's concentrate on those reports because they are conducted by independent auditors, and they are a big value in making the process of monitoring, the providers more efficient. So I will start with the SOC 1 report. In Europe, it's usually issued under standard ICAE 3420, sorry. And it's actually concentrating mostly on controls that are needed for the audit of the financial statements. So they are concentrating mostly on access management, change management, IT operations. So this is the main purpose, and the control matrix for those reports is strictly created by the organization, by the vendor, and it should be tweaked to address customers' needs. However, they are mostly concentrating on the general controls that are tested by the IT auditors for the purpose of the financial statement. There's also the SOC 2 report that is using the trust service criteria mentioned by Sebastian, that are security, confidentiality, processing integrity, availability, and privacy. And those criteria are defined by ISACA, so the US-based institute, and they are more strict because there are some frames, some requirements that must be needed, and the control matrix that is tested as part of the audit resulting in the attestation report needs to cover those controls. So let's focus on those criteria. So the security is the basic one that is needed in every report. However, depending on the approach, it's not as it's wider than the general control matrix used for SOC 1 reports. So, for example, under security, there are some principles, COSO principles defined by the ISACA that are related to human resources. So you are checking. So the auditors are checking whether the competencies of our vendors in place are checked. There are also some controls and requirements related to penetration testing. So it's still better than the SOC 1. As for the other criteria, the availability and confidentiality and processing integrity are also important in terms of DORA, and the requirements related to risk management in terms of data. As for the privacy, it's defined by the ISACA. So it's based on the US requirements, not strictly reflecting the GDPR requirements. However, it still can bring some value. So there are still two reports that I would like to discuss with you. The first one is the SOC 3. It's basically a marketing tool. It's a report that can be published on a website of your provider, and it's like some sections of the report of the SOC 2 report are cut and are just used as a briefly marketing tool. It's not a good value to use it in terms of auditing and verifying the security maturity of our providers. And there is ICAE 3000 standard. This is not a standardized set of controls, control matrices, but is an assurance standard that allows us to actually rely on the report because it's also signed by the CPA in Poland. It's a big web evident. And the control matrix can be tweaked and changed to be compliant, to actually rely on a standard like Web Trust, DORA, or GDPR. So it's also a good tool to rely on it when we are assessing our vendors. So that was the source of the reports. All of those reports I mentioned previously can be in two types. The first one is the type 1, that it's concentrating only on the design of the controls, and it's issued for a point in time. So we are seeing only like a snapshot of the organization for the control matrix. And on the opposite is the type 2. Type 2 is a report that is checking both design and effectiveness of the controls that are defined and are under the audit for the attestation report. The type 2 can cover from 6 to 12 months, and it's giving us a broader perspective, and we can check based on it whether our provider was really doing what they decided to sign in the contract. Please keep in mind, and please do not switch and mix types with the sort of the reports, because we can have SOC 1 type 1 and SOC 1 type 2, as well as SOC 2 type 1 and SOC 2 type 2. Those both type of the reports have a different structure. So there are parts that are common for both type 1 and type 2. It's the management assertion, sometimes called management statement. It's the section related to auditor's opinion, and the section 3 related to the system description. Please keep in mind that section 1 and section 2 sometimes can be switched. However, it's in line with all standards, both European and American, that we can start the report for either management assertion or the auditor's opinion. It's still the same, it can be switched. So, and in terms of the SOC 2, we've got the additional section, it's the section 4, that is related to the performance evaluation, so the results of the testing. Let's move on through all of the sections because it's a key part to understand how you can rely on the report. In section 1, we've got the management assertion. So they are telling us that, yes, what is written in the section 3 in the system description is okay and it's in line with the true. The auditor's opinions is actually the opinion on the report, on the controls, and whether there are any issues or not. The section 3 is the section also prepared by your vendor, and it contains the system description. So it has the description of the service provided, the processes that are supporting the service, the descriptions of the systems itself, as well as it has also description of the control environment, control objective, and the controls themselves. It also provides a brief description of the subcontractors that are supporting the service. The section 4 is actually very important because it contains all controls, all control descriptions, and the key part, the assessment result. So whether there are any issues or not, if there are any deviations, whether they were managed or not. And there's also the section 5. Please keep in mind that this section is not under the review of the auditor. So it's not under the auditor's opinion. So basically, there can be any additional information. During the pandemic, there were many information related to the COVID approach and how the COVID actually impacted the organization. The section 5 can also contain information on mapping to any frameworks, regulations like ISO, or even sometimes the DORA requirements. So we know what are the reports, what are the parts of the reports, and now we can discuss how to rely on an attestation report. The first and most important point is actually to determine what sort of report was delivered by our provider. Is it SOC 1 or SOC 2? It's very important to choose the correct report, because if the report won't contain all information, all risks, and information on security measures that were added in the contract, we will still need to do some additional checks on our vendor. We also need to check the type of the report, especially in terms of the fact that the type 1 is giving us only like the snapshot of the organization, not the wider picture, not the timeline, how the processes were managed. So this is the first step. As a second step, we need to go to section 1 or section 2 to the auditor's opinion. In terms of the auditor's opinion, first of all, we need to check whether it was signed by the CPA or not, or the organization of the CPA. It's also important to check the validity of the organization that is issuing the report. It does not require doing a screening of the auditor. It's just basically Googling and searching for the name of the organization and checking whether there were any problems with reports or the financial statements signed and issued by the organization. So we basically need to check whether the auditor was independent and whether the report is reliable. As a next step, we need to see whether the report is considered as qualified. If the report is considered as qualified, it's like a red light for us. Maybe not red light, but red flag. We need to directly, while reviewing the section 4, go through the testing results, because there might be some problems. I will discuss it later on while discussing how to read section 4. So after checking the auditor's opinion, we need to go to section 3. It's very important to read it in details and go carefully through it to see whether the report is really covering our service, the service that the vendor is providing for us. So, and we need to concentrate on system architecture and the system and the service description itself. Why? I'll give you an example. Microsoft is issuing a lot of reports. And there are reports that are dedicated for Azure and for Azure for some governance entities in various countries. So it's not enough for us to just download from our vendor secure site a report or obtain the first report that our vendor provided to us. We need to check whether it's really applicable for us and for service that the vendor is providing for us. Also, please keep in mind that some vendors are merging the services into one report. It's allowable as long as the processes are common. So you need to just go through the section 3 and check it. Then there can be also cases that the report is covering only the solution that is provided on cloud, and for the solution that is provided on-premise, installed on the customer's environment, there's no report. Actually, I had once this situation, and we were pretty shocked that the report was only for the cloud solution, and the changes that were developed for the on-prem solutions were not covered by the report. And all the development took place in the on the vendor sites. And while going through the section 3, you also need to concentrate on the subservice organization and the complementary subservice organization controls, so-called CSOCs. Those are the controls that are excluded from the scope of the report. However, your provider should either review the SOC report of their vendors or conduct some sort of assessments on the site. After determining that the scope of the report is actually applicable for us, we can go to the section 4 and check the control matrix together with the testing results. So first of all, we need to check whether all controls that are in our control matrix for our vendors, whether all security measures that are in the contract with the provider are addressed by the report. If not, we will still need to ask some questions or audit in some areas our vendor. Moreover, we also need to check whether there were any deviations or issues noted for the controls that are covering our risk approach. Okay, so thank you very much, and here is time for questions.
Based on your opinion, how advanced are the companies in terms of the third-party vendor risk management implementation? Because you just gave us a lot of examples, and if you can share with us, what is the maturity of the companies in that space?
It depends on the country. Because in Poland, I think it's not a very mature process. In other countries, like in the UK, it's very mature.
Yeah, and of course, it depends on sector as well. As Magda mentioned, we see that, for example, countries and globally, because it doesn't match. So as Magda already mentioned, when we take a look on countries, on the companies that operates globally and utilize a really number of different type of vendors in different countries, they do have global processes that aims to assess their vendors. Mainly because we are also support such companies in third-party assessment. So what we can observe, those type of assessments are not very deep. This is mainly like going through basic set of controls. It's rather checking whether some policies, procedures are in place, whether the company has established information management security systems. So this is that level of granularity. When we will take into look what DORA imposes on financial institutions, still we do not have a precise type of audits. So as Magda presented, we will need to figure out what kind of controls and what kind of inspections, audits needs to be applied. If you will take a look on the Polish sector, So 2 years ago, we conducted together with Polish Banking Association a survey amongst commercial banks in Poland, asking a question how well they are prepared for DORA. So it was like 2 years ago once DORA was published. So a part of the fact that everybody, of course, said that they are well prepared, obviously, but the banks pointed out that CPRM section is one of the most challenging when it comes to implementation and when it comes to making the CPRM process operationalize. So when we will think about the number of vendors we need to audit, when we will think about the number of contracts we need to comply with, this is really a vast exercise. And like without automation, without some tools that will support this process, it will be difficult. As Jan mentioned in the beginning, the Excel is the king and and is widely utilized by every company, and like managing third-party providers is a good example. But now, when we will take a look on the volume of contracts and volume of providers, this will be impossible to manage that part in a sound way without automation. Much then, thank you for participating. For those who joined us online, thank you for you who find time and came here on site in our office. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've got your
Have
own.
a good one.